Oh howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Welcome to day 16 of teaser season for patch 3.24 and the upcoming Necropolis expansion. If you've missed any of the previous days, I will put a link to all of them down in the description of this video. And just keep in mind there was no video on day 13 or day 14 because there were no teasers on those days. Now, there's a number of things that Trade QOL haven't made a large deal about announcing, and that's mostly the changes that they've made to the patch notes. A lot of people haven't noticed these. There's some big quality of life trade related things. We'll get to that in a sec, but let's go through the things that they have talked more about. Firstly, there's going to be a pretty significant interview worth watching in about 16 hours from the time I'm recording this video, and that's going to be streamer Zizaran interviewing Mark Roberts about 3.24. This could be really good. I've submitted a couple of questions to that, and hopefully there'll be a bunch of other ones that people submit. And on top of that, Zizaran will undoubtedly have a bunch of good questions himself. So that's something that's worth a watch, and it's coming up in 15 or 16 hours time from when this video is being recorded. Next, there is a unique item that's been teased that looks very, very good for an attack wand, and there is also a support gem. So let's take a quick look at Grace of the Goddess. This item is much better than a lot of people have been giving it credit for online. This is a very, very powerful early endgame weapon that is going to get you a tremendous power boost when you get it, and that is something you are going to have a hard time replacing with a rare. You can replace it with a rare, you will late in progression, but you're not replacing this with a rare for under about 1,000 chaos early in a league, and probably not even at 1,000 chaos. Probably you're starting to look at 2 or 3. At that point, yes, you'll be able to get something that's better than Grace the Goddess. This has 3 main use cases, and I feel that there are 2 that it's solid in and 1 that it's weak in. So let's start with the one that it's weak in, and that is as a caster stat stick for physical spell builds. Here, it is providing a large amount of physical damage added as rainbow elemental damage, but it's probably not enough to compete with other weapons that you could use instead. The next use case for this is on a wand attack build. Here, it's got a very large amount of physical damage on it. This wand, however, has a drawback as well, and that is its slow attack speed. All that said, the physical damage that it does is so high, and then is amplified by this physical added as extra rainbow damage, that it ends up being a reasonably strong attack weapon that you're likely to use until maybe about the point that you start getting your 4th Void Stone, but potentially even a little bit longer than that. It is fundamentally going to be pretty hard to replace this, although of course low attack speed on wands can be quite painful, and you might decide that you're actually better off using something that's got 8-10% less total DPS if the attack speed on the replacement wand is higher, so that you can spend less time overkilling weak enemies and more time moving around. The third use case for this is on a battle mage build or anything else where the wand's damage is added to the spell, so that can include spell slinger as well. And here it's also looking pretty good. There's a fair chunk of flat added physical damage that you're getting here, but the key thing is that unlike a rare wand that is dedicated to being a physical DPS wand that will eclipse Grace of the Goddess on that metric, what Grace of the Goddess's real strength here is that not only does it have this decent physical damage, but it is also a mediocre to good caster stat stick at the same time. And if you're playing a battle mage or spell slinger build, then you get to benefit from both aspects here. I think this is its best use case, and somewhere that if that archetype was better, then this item would be extremely, extremely good on it. Trade QOL also revealed 2020 stats on the new Sacred Wisp support gem. This is a gem that provides a large boost of single target damage, and it is only good against rare and unique monsters, but against rare and unique monsters, it's not just good, it's fantastic. At 2020, this is a 49% more damage multiplier on average against rare and unique monsters, whereas most other support gems that are 2020 tend to be closer to 34% more. However, against monsters that are of lower rarity, it's only 24.5%, and if you happen to have Grace of the Goddess, it can be as much as 73.5% more against rare monsters there. Although, of course, that locks you into using that one specific weapon. Now, where does this really underperform? It underperforms in Delirious content, because Delirious content has higher damage reduction on normal and magic monsters than it does on rare and unique monsters, and that means that essentially getting more damage against rare monsters and unique monsters is comparatively of less value to in most other content. All in all though, this is a pretty solid support gem, and one that I do think people will use if there is any wand attack based builds that are popular in this league. I don't think it's enough though to carry such a build, so I wouldn't be surprised if this is something that sees little use this patch, but that definitely will get used in the future if there's a rework of any of the main wand attack skills in the future. The next piece of information that we got today was the item filter information. Now, this is one of those things that people like Neversink and Hobbit have to spend an enormous amount of time going through all of the fine details of this. But for most players, what this is just a list of the names of new items that are being added in the patch. The most significant things here are the names of all the new Scarabs, a couple of tattoos that are returning that weren't widely expected to be returning, and also all of the base tiers of the maps. And when we get to the maps, you'll see there's a couple of good ones for farming the chains that bind, especially if you're playing in solo self-found. That is a very useful div card to keep in mind. So, there is one new base item, the mechanical belt. More on that when we get to the patch note updates. There is going to be a number of changes to Scarabs that have already been discussed in the patch notes. And there's a few new items. The Veiled Scarab may only drop from legacy items that are turned into them, but they may also drop in some circumstances we don't know about yet. So more information hopefully on that will come up at least once we start playing the game. I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out that Grinding Gear Games have changed some of the rewards that previously gave Sextants into Veiled Scarabs instead, but they've not announced that they're doing that either. In the map fragments section, you can see all the names of the new Uber fragments, which were already known, and then we have all of the Scarabs. Now, when I originally recorded this video, we didn't know anything about these Scarabs, but since then, Grinding Gear Games have updated some information on what some of these Scarabs will do, and we'll put some discussion of that towards the end of this video. We could speculate on what these do. For example, it seems pretty reasonable that the Legion Scarab of the Sekhmet probably modifies one or both of the armies that are present in that Legion encounter to be Maraketh ones, but there's also been a little bit of official information revealed, and we also now know that these Horn Scarabs are ones that do pretty special things. Next we have all of the new Embers of the Allflame, which are an item class that's being added, and there's not a huge amount that we can say here other than that they seem to have something that's tied to a number of different league mechanics, and of course the frog ones look like they could be particularly good because the old frog prophecy was very good at just giving you a bunch of XP without adding too much danger. Additionally, some of these Allflame Embers are listed as flaring, and that could mean that these end up having more of an impact on the map. In the returning items section, there's a whole bunch of tattoos we knew were coming back, but very interestingly, Journey Tattoo of the Body, Mind and Soul. The one you really want to watch here is the Journey Tattoo of the Mind. Journey Tattoo of the Mind will transform a 30 dexterity notable passive, and there's only 4 of these on the passive tree, but it will convert them into plus 30 maximum mana per allocated Journey Tattoo of the Mind. Now it's important to note that this is the same wording as on Grand Spectrum, and that means that if you do allocate all 4 of these, then each individual tattoo is going to be 120 mana, and they're going to be a total of 480 flat mana. It's a fairly high opportunity cost to get to all of those dex nodes, but it is definitely something that you can do. So do keep that in mind. I think that's going to be a popular thing to look into for some of the Hierophant builds that I'm sure are going to be popular. There's a number of things that are being removed. No real surprises here. All the invitations, all of the things that are related to Sextants, and also all of the old Scarabs because out with the old and in with the new. Having a quick look at the map tiers next, the first thing you probably want to look for is what is the lowest tier map that has the Chains That Bind divination card. And this is going to be Cells map in tier 4 and Cage map in tier 5. This divination card has historically been very common, and it is by far the easiest way to get your first 6 link in a new league. Do not fall into the trap of farming for Humility, the divination card for Tabula Rasa. Channel's not a bad map or anything, but the divination card is a lot rarer than it was a couple of years ago, and as a result I highly recommend against farming it. You can do much better by farming Chains That Bind, which will give you a better 6 link and it'll be easier to find. Additionally, you may notice that Burial Chambers is only a tier 5 map. This has some of the best divination cards in the game. It's got the Fortunate, it's got the Doctor. Granted, the Doctor is extremely rare, and the Fortunate's not common either, but this is something that can drop even in the bottom tier version of this, and if the new league mechanic does incentivize any sort of low tier magic find farming strategy, then this is going to be the map in which it's done. Scanning up the rest of the maps, there's a whole bunch of different variety, but the other thing that starts to really matter is the tier 16 native maps are Plateau, Lava Chamber, Castle Ruins, and Thicket. Here Plateau is a very smooth map, but it's also a very sparsely populated one. Castle Ruins isn't too bad, and Thicket and Lava Chamber are both pretty mediocre. There are no really dangerous map bosses, and none of these are among the worst 10 maps in the game for layout. The other thing you may want to consider though is the option of a 1 Voidstone Shadow Shaping Atlas, and in that case everything from tier 13 to 16 becomes a tier 16 map, and you then want to use Shadow Shaping to ban 7, 8 or 9 of these tile sets, If you decide to go that way, I'd be inclined to strike off Lava Chamber, Arena, Forbidden Woods, Maze, Grave Trough, Mineral Pools, and Flooded Mine, and then maybe one or two others. And that puts you in a very good position to use the Destructive Play keystone on your Atlas, and to have at least 10 different maps that can drop, but also at the same time to have no truly horrible layout. Then of course there's all the names of the tier 17 maps if you didn't know them already. I think we did know all of them, but they're all here. Now let's talk about the changes that have been made to the patch notes, because these have been something Grinding Gear Games haven't talked about very much, and there's some big ones. Let's start with the trade things. So firstly, I wanted to demonstrate that you can do listings on the trade site already in some fairly silly currencies. Here you'll see a level 21 Vile Molten Shell Gem that I've listed on the trade site, and I've listed it for 67 tier 16 Basilica maps. You can already do this in game. This is in 3.23. I don't expect that anyone is interested in purchasing that, but I thought I would just list it up there to test that that could work. Well, you're now going to be able to do that with slightly more interesting and useful endgame consumables. You can now do that with Conqueror maps, and they can be grouped by Citadel. So you can have, say, I want to sell this item for 4 Drox maps. Elder Guardian maps are also going to be in the same situation, so you could say I want to sell this for 2 Purifier maps. Synthesized maps are also going to show up in their own category here as well, so you'll be able to list items in synthesized maps. Forbidden Tomes will be grouped by tiers, Blighted and Blight Ravage maps will be grouped by tiers as well, and you can list items in Yellow Beasts as well. But potentially one of the best things here is that you can also seek out players who are looking to sell 25 of the same Elder Guardian map at once, and that's going to be something that's going to reduce trade friction in a way that previously you had to jump over to Discord in order to do. That said, it's worth remembering that bulk trades like this do entail dealing with scammers quite a bit, and that's one of the main selling points of the trade discords, is that they're pretty ruthless at rooting out and purging scammers from their ranks, and that's not something that the Path of Exile website does. So if you're conducting bulk trades through the trade website, buyer beware, be diligent, and assume that your counterparty is a scammer until proven otherwise. The other thing that's also going to be grouped together, and I think this is going to be more useful than a lot of people think, is heist contracts. These are going to be grouped together by a tier and a job type. Now, job type means, for example, deception contract. Low tier contracts will be in one category, medium tier in a second, high tier in a third. Now these are going to be tiers 1 to 5, tiers 6 to 10, and tiers 11 to 15 respectively. Then there is top tier contracts, which is going to be tier 16 and up. Interestingly, at the moment, tier 16 is the cap. Even though in Heist League, using some legacy systems and the misinformation unique watchstone, which is no longer something that exists in the game at all, you could raise maps up to tier 19, but the Heist contracts that they dropped were still limited to tier 16. It'll be interesting to see whether Heist now extends to level 84, and if it does extend to level 84, whether there's any interesting little things that have been hidden there. Blueprints are also grouped in these same tiers, and if you're searching for top tier, you can also further limit them to be 3-wing or 4-wing blueprints. So there's quite a lot of additional agency there. In terms of other changes in the patch notes, daily Kirac missions are no longer going to exist. I think they concluded that the commissioned officer node was not going to work in conjunction with the 3 Atlas trees. To compensate for this nerf to Kirac mission availability, every Atlas passive that gives you a percentage chance to proc an additional Kirac mission upon completing a map has had its chance of proccing doubled. This is going to be better for the vast majority of players. The corner case where it's going to be worse is for people who take quite a long time to get through the Atlas, but do get to log on every day. In that situation, those people are going to make slightly slower progress, but I do think they're going to be a small minority, and the overwhelming majority of players will have more access to Kirac missions under this new system. Other changes are being made. The Mycelial Swarm Notable Atlas passive was a complete trap. It was a really bad decision to take it, and it's now being completely removed, so that rookie players don't take it by accident, and veteran players weren't going to take it anyway, so it's just a bad choice that's being removed. One of the other Blight clusters is getting a slight improvement to its entry node as well. Varieties of items contained in one Blight chest in your maps are lucky is replacing the existing 2% chance on completing your maps to gain a free use of the Blight map crafting option. This change doesn't apply to Ruthless, they'll probably keep the old worse version of it. Now there's a couple of bug fixes. The big one is actually something that was released on day 15, so we'll get into that as well because that was missed in my day 15 wrap up. It happened after I made that video live. The big change here is that Blink Arrow and Mirror Arrow of Prismatic clones will now benefit from player bonuses to chaos damage with attacks. Previously they only did 2/3 of the time, now they always do. In terms of other changes that were made on day 15 that didn't make it into the day 15 video because I went live on that a little bit early, the changes that are being made to stacked decks that had previously been teased, these were originally announced as only applying to boss exclusive uniques. They've now been extended to apply to all boss exclusive items. I do want to point out that the wording on this is somewhat unclear, and it would be useful to have an authoritative list of which cards are included. To give a couple of examples of things that are definitely boss exclusive items and that are definitely going to be affected by this nerf, the divination card The Long Con provides an Elder Slayer's Exalted Orb. The only way you can get Elder Slayer's Exalted Orbs is by killing the Elder Slayers at the moment. So that's definitely in. The divination card The Sacrifice provides a 6-linked sacrificial garb with item level 100. Sacrificial garbs can absolutely only be obtained through defeating Atzuri, whether that be in the Apex of Sacrifice, the Alluring Abyss, or the Temple of Atsuatl. So that is going to be something else that's definitely a boss exclusive item, but not a boss exclusive unique. But where it becomes a bit less clear, what about items that are crafted in such a way that requires you to have invested boss exclusive currency? For example, the divination card The Aspirant provides an elevated item. Elevated items can only be crafted through the use of the Maven's Orb, which is now called the Orb of Dominance. That is exclusive to a number of bosses. As a result, is that considered to be a boss exclusive item? I don't know. I think the answer is no, but I'm not sure. What about Mortal Ignorance? This fragment is used in order to access the Alluring Abyss encounter. It's primarily found from killing Atzuri in the Apex of Sacrifice. However, you can also get it through Ritual. You can also get it through fragment rewards from Incubators. You can also get it from a few other places in the game, probably most notably now from Mortal Val Zones. Is this considered to be a boss exclusive item? My intuition says it's not, but also it could be, depending on Grinding Games' own internal decisions. And then you have the question of what is a boss. Is Stranglegasp considered to be a boss exclusive item? It only comes from aspirational content. It comes from defeating a Blight Ravaged map. Is a Blight Ravaged map considered to be a boss? I don't know. I don't think so, but it might well be. So I'd like to see an authoritative list published as to which cards are being removed from stack decks here. All that said, most of the value of stack decks in trade leagues has been from the chance of getting Mageblood, cards for Headhunter, cards for Divine Orbs, cards for Fracturing Orbs, and cards for Mirrors of Kalandra. None of those cards are being removed, and as a result, it's not going to have a big impact on the value of stack decks in trade league. Next we have one of the harvest crafts that's been broken by the Scarab overhaul. The Scarab Shuffle harvest crafting option that was much beloved of trade league flippers has been removed. Convocation is getting buffed and changed. Essentially, all existing versions of Convocation are going to end up in a weird spot over in Standard. But new versions of the gem are going to have the power of the existing level 27 version of Convocation, and they're going to be more awkward to access. Rather than coming from the Gravicius quest, they're now going to come from the library quest instead. A couple of little changes to items. The Mechalarm belt from Heist, which is the one that causes it to summon a taunting minion, those are no longer going to exist. They're going to be replaced with unset belts, which are named mechanical belts. I do not think these are good at all. The more that I think about them, the more I think they're just going to be rubbish. The reason for that is a question of opportunity cost. You're essentially giving up 28 points of chaos resistance endgame, 23 before you can afford resistance catalysts, or you're giving up 38 points of resistances or 32 before catalysts on a 2-stone ring. That's the sacrifice you're making in order to get your unset ring socket. On the flip side, the sacrifice that you're making to use the new version of the mechanical belt is that you're giving up on a Stygian Vice. A Stygian Vice with a not very good Abyss Jewel in it could give you 36 life, 12 to 2 different elemental resistances, and 10 to a random attribute. That's a not very good jewel, and already then that is eclipsing the implicits on any of the rings. And of course, as you start upgrading from a not very good Abyssal Jewel to something that's fantastic, the gap only gets wider. For that reason, I don't think this is going to be well received unless there's unusual mods that it can roll. Unset rings can roll mods that can't exist on normal rings. For example, +1, +2, or +3 to the level of socketed gems. If the mechanical belt has versions of that mod but much higher tiers, like +6, +7, or +8 to the level of socketed gems, then there may be some use cases for it. But even if it's got 1, 2, and 3, I just can't see myself ever using this belt. There's also going to be a new Suffix modifier that can roll on minion wands and shields that grants level 1 Convocation skill, which is something I think a lot of people will want to get. And let's finally talk about the big bug fix. Fixed a bug where Rain of Arrows of Artillery would target its own location if it could not find a target. This is something that has completely broken a broken build. There was a bug that I'd mentioned in a previous video where if you have Rain of Arrows of Artillery and it is fired by a trap, and that trap was not set off by a monster but instead timed out, then the Rain of Arrows of Artillery would fire all of its projectiles straight on top of itself. In short, you could have every single one of them hit an enemy, and this is going to be the premier boss killing skill in 3.24 if not fixed. Well, it's been fixed. Rain of Arrows of Artillery goes back to being a serviceable but not great skill, and we don't end up in a situation where bossing is dominated by one particularly broken build, like would have happened if that change wasn't made. So I had finished recording this video, and I was in the middle of editing it when I started getting frantic pings over on Discord, and it turned out that Grinding Games had continued working after 5 o'clock New Zealand time, and they had released a whole new shipment of Scarabs for us to have a look at. So I want to quickly go through those as well. Starts out with the Expedition Scarab, which is something that is very basic and very straightforward. Area contains an expedition encounter. This is what you use if you are not an expedition enjoyer generally, but you want to experiment with expedition a little bit, maybe run 10 maps with expeditions on them to see if you like the encounter or not. It doesn't really do much on an expedition tree because you can get 100% chance for expeditions to spawn in your regular mapping anyway. However, it's there, it does what it needs to do. The other 4 expedition Scarabs we'll be showing you here though do something quite different. They don't guarantee an expedition encounter. They don't modify the number of expedition encounters at all. If you don't have one, they achieve absolutely nothing. But when you do have an expedition encounter, they juice it up in a pretty significant way. Let's take a quick look at the Expedition Scarab of Rune Finding. Expedition encounters in the area have a 100% increased number of runic monster markers. Importantly, this has limit 2. Now, my interpretation of this is that you can put 2 stacks of this particular Scarab into the map device, and then it will consume 1 from each of those stacks, but that will take up 2 of your Scarab slots. I could be wrong though. It could be that you only need to put in 1 stack and it will default to using 2 unless there's only 1 Scarab there. And it'll give you a bigger result if it consumes 2 of them. Of course, the exact ways that this works is something that will probably become clearer as we start using these Scarabs. This is very powerful because runic monsters provide most of the rewards from Expedition. They are the source of all of your logbooks, and they're also a very good source of other rewards. So this is a powerful Scarab. If you're on an Expedition focused strategy, you're probably going to want to use a lot of these. Next we have the Expedition Scarab of Verisium Powder. This is not for everyday use, unless you are not using the Expedition Nuke. If you're using the Expedition Nuke, this doesn't do very much. It does do a little bit. It does give you a bit of extra increased explosive radius, but that is only additive, not multiplicative, with the Expedition Nuke's increases. So it's okay, but it's not great. But 20% increased number of explosives is a big stat, and if you are not using the Expedition Nuke, then suddenly you don't have very much increased explosive radius from other sources. This is going to stack a lot better. This is a very good Scarab if you're willing to go to the extra work of placing individual explosives and foregoing the power and the speed of the Expedition Nuke. Next we have the Expedition Scarab of the Scald, which puts Danig in charge of the expedition in the area. No matter what your strategy is, whether it's Tujen focused or whether it's Rog focused, you are going to find that Danig is better even than your preferred Expedition Rogue, and that's because Danig's bound artifacts can be traded 1 for 1, or sometimes more favourably than 1 for 1, for whichever rogue artifacts you want. And on top of that, on average using Danig's reroll currency provides you with 2 Astrogales, 1 exotic coinage, and 1 scrap metal. So getting a Danig encounter is flat out better in every way, and this is going to give you a Danig encounter. Also, did I mention that Danig sometimes sells you logbooks? The last of the Expedition Scarabs is the most explosive, pardon the pun, and that is that remnants in Expedition encounters have 2 additional suffixes and 2 additional prefixes. This essentially means that all those remnants are going to provide 3 times the challenge and 3 times the reward, which is a pretty significant increase as long as you're not accidentally setting off remnants that you can't beat. This is going to be very significant, especially in conjunction with 200% increased runic monster markers. So that's the Expedition Scarabs. Let's talk about something that directly replaces a popular sextant mod, the Cartography Scarab of Corruption. This is going to cause all maps that drop in the instance to be corrupted and to have 8 modifiers. This is a very powerful effect, especially if it's something you can sustain, although I do think that this could be quite rare because the sextant mod that it's replacing was quite rare. And finally, we have the Horn Scarab of Awakening, which is something that requires a little bit more explanation. You can select one imbued crafting option on the map device. This provides a whole bunch of special Kirac crafts that you otherwise can't get. These are not the familiar ones like Corrupting Tempest and Monstrous Treasure. Instead, we have Nullify prefixes. Prefix modifiers have no effect. The same for suffixes. Suffix modifiers have no effect. These are things you probably don't want to do except on tier 17 maps. Next, we have an Uber version of the Abyss craft, which I don't think is so much better than the base Abyss craft that it's something you would waste such a rare Scarab on. But then we have an Uber version of the Essence craft, which is something that you might consider using a rare Scarab on. Areas contain 2 additional essences. Imprisoned monsters in the area have a 30% chance to have 3 additional essences. And of course, you can use this in conjunction with other sources of increased essences. So that's the new delivery of Scarabs that we got late on the day. I'm going to leave it there. That is the end of Teaser Season Day 16 for patch 3.24 and the Necropolis expansion. May your Varlorbs have interesting results.